What's top of mind for global supply chains right now? I'm joined by Michael Taylor, partner for international trade with the law firm of King and Spalding. Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Good. Thanks for being with me today. So, how has the pandemic impacted companies' ability to achieve visibility of their global supply chains?
Well, I think the easy answer to that is things have slowed down. People are all of a sudden finding that as they looked internationally over the last 20 years in their supply chain and looking for inputs, raw materials, but also looking for finished products in many cases, that their dependence on another entity or another country for getting goods to them in timely manners without warehousing space is causing problems for those companies that are relying on just-in-time delivery, because factories overseas are shutting down and they're shutting down here as well. And then there's delays in freight and in shipping issues.
Yeah. And of course, there are plenty of problems that were in existence before the pandemic, one of which is, of course, unfair foreign competition. What should companies be looking out for right now in that area, and what form is that currently taking?
So we represent a number of U.S. manufacturers in this space, and it's a great question. I think companies that are involved in manufacturing that are seeing unfair pricing, so they're seeing either products that are coming in that are causing competition with their product because they're being sold below a normal value, which is called dumping, or if they're being subsidized. And what we're really starting to see over the past few months from a policy perspective is countries are starting to pump a lot of money into manufacturing in their countries to get it restarted. And that could create some subsidy issues where manufacturers in different locations are having to face competition from companies that are manufacturing with government subsidies that are allowing them to lower their prices in order to take market share. And so the trade remedy laws are available to address that situation.
And you're not just talking about China when you say that, are you? Or is China the big fish in this whole scenario?
Yeah, China's the big fish, but not just China, for sure. There's been longstanding subsidy questions between the United States and Europe and aerospace, for example. But countries all over the world can engage in subsidy practices, and some subsidies are perfectly legitimate and fine under international law. It's subsidies that cause disruption and that everybody in the world has agreed are countervailable that are problematic. And it's across the board. But China, I think a lot of people are looking to China and see that they've got a long history of countervailable subsidies.
Yeah. Now, the pandemic is one issue, but then, of course, the tariffs that were put in place by the Trump administration and as of this date maintained by the Biden administration are also a big issue that are causing companies maybe to reconsider where they source their manufacturing. What are the real world prospects, however, for the reshoring of manufacturing from Asia back to the United States? What's the reality there?
You take a step back and something underlying your question is important for everyone to realize that the Biden administration is really carrying forward a lot of the Trump administration policies with respect to trade. It's one area where there's not a lot of difference between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. There's a different tone for sure and some different messaging, but the core is really the same. And the Biden administration has really run with the idea of reshoring in the same way that the Trump administration had run and laid the groundwork for that idea. And there are some delays and there are some issues with companies who are trying to reshore. Right now, it's having a workforce in the United States, and I think that's probably over time will level out. I mean, what we're hearing from companies who are trying to reshore right now is getting the workforce because a number of people are not willing under COVID situations to come in and work in a situation, and or there's just a tight workforce right now in the United States. Right. But getting space, it takes time. We have a number of clients we're working with as well that are trying to reshore, but it takes time to build the infrastructure, to put the capital investment and to build things. And so I think the Biden administration knows that, and it's interesting how that is tailing into this new infrastructure plan they've got in place.
Yeah, not only do they have to bring factories back to the United States, they have to relocate or put in proximity to those factories all the suppliers that feed those factories. So I imagine that's a very, very complex issue. At the same time, though, I wonder if another reason why they might be considering it is congestion, severe congestion at West Coast ports, specifically of materials coming in from Asia. Is that a factor also in causing manufacturers to think about, hey, well, maybe the way to get around that is to manufacture here in North America?
Yeah, I think that's one of many factors, and it's insightful. I think what happened is, looking back 10 or 20 years ago, a number of companies decided from a manufacturing standpoint that they could gain profit by moving overseas and by distributing internationally. And there's some real reasons to go international, right? Because you have an international supply base and you have different chains.
Sure.
But some companies that were not thinking about the risk of freight disruptions, of COVID, right? Health disruptions in other manufacturing locations. I think a lot of that is now coming where people who just didn't do the math, they just saw they didn't do the risk calculation. They saw higher profitability potential without understanding that there's additional risk there. Those folks are starting to understand that risk issue, which includes freight, which includes congestion at ports, which includes short numbers of vessels who are able to load containers and carry back and forth. The inability to get materials when you need them. That is all now coming back, and companies are saying, "Hey, what is the equation? We can account for freight, but we may not be able to account for raw material disruptions." They may say we can do both. We can account for both, but they've got to. I think people's eyes are open more now than they were 20 years ago when they're thinking about where to put their factories.
How also do you think the Biden administration's new trade policy with regard to critical supply chains, its review of critical supply chains, and is looking into, I guess, what would be a pumping up kind of a domestic source of certain types of essential products. Do you think that is also going to play into decisions as to whether or not to reshore?
It's interesting to see whether it will or not. I think it's a little too early to know whether it will actually drive people. The Biden administration clearly wants it to drive. I think it really, the way I've been thinking about it is it's more wind to try and push along some momentum that's already happening. I think economic factors have caused people to think about reshoring or at least securing their supply chain and controlling their supply chain themselves in ways that they hadn't previously. And what the Biden administration supply chain announcements, Buy America tied into that, but not necessarily just all Buy America, is really focused at let's do what we can to ensure that we don't have a situation like COVID issues again, where we can't get key medicine, we can't get key materials. And they're really driving people to look at allies, not just the United States, but allies for manufacturing bases, but also to drive policy away from China for political reasons.
Well, my understanding is that the Buy America campaign on the part of the Biden administration is largely aimed at government procurement, because the government doesn't really have the ability or the authority to tell companies where they can source stuff that they're making just for the consumer market. But is there a link there? Do you think that that will be further impetus for companies to consider domestic supply chain manufacturing just in some way related to this Buy America idea?
Yeah, clearly I do. It's not just government procurement directly when you think about it. What Buy America and Buy American policies, and it's an onion of an issue because there's lots of different layers that go to it. But ultimately, what the idea behind that is, where the government provides money, that money comes with strings, and so there's always direct purchases by the government through the federal acquisition regulations. But in addition, there's grant money. There's money that goes through the states for EPA funding, for example, for clean water issues. There's money for technology. And the new infrastructure bill, if you see what's pending right now in Congress, there are a lot of strings attached to the 1.2 trillion in money that's available, or at least potentially available, to ensure sea lines of communication and good avenues for infrastructure. Making sure that all of that is, the money that's being spent is to promote economic growth in the United States. And as a result, there will be companies who I think are saying, hey, there's a big pot of money out there, even though it may not be a direct, I'm selling to the government, I'm going to have to expect that somebody I'm selling to ultimately may be getting a grant through a state that has federal funds attached to it that may come with strings.
So far, our discussion has been pretty binary. It's been either, well, they're going to continue to manufacture in Asia, they're going to bring it back to the United States. There are, of course, other options, one of which is Mexico and other parts of North America. Is that a consideration right now that companies are making as well?
Sure. And I think it was interesting to see, even under the Trump administration, when they were having the trade war with China and the Section 301 tariffs you were talking about with China. Exclusions were being granted at the time, even under the Trump administration, not for necessarily moving things because something wasn't available for being made in the United States, It wasn't available outside of China. So there was a real effort, I think, to move things in that realm away from China, but to other countries because of the geopolitical issues.
Mhm.
So the Biden administration, I think, is also carrying forward on that sense where there's a recognition that with China policies, there is an ability of the United States to drive policy if manufacturing is happening outside of China, but less so within China. And so they're happy to do that. But North America as a whole, with the USMCA, US Mexico Canada Agreement, I think North America as a whole is a beneficiary of some of these policies, not
Yeah.
just the United States.
It does feel like so much is still up in the air, though. Like a lot of decisions haven't been made. Companies are thinking about these things, but we're not seeing a strong trend in one direction or the other. And would that be fair to say that we're in kind of a transitional period right now as companies mull over these issues?
Yes, I think that's insightful. I would say that there's probably more momentum behind the scenes. It's just taking time. The first, say, 2 years of the Trump administration, I think a lot of companies were standing by waiting to see what happened. I think now, 5 years into a lot of this stuff starting to happen and the Biden administration picking up and running with a lot of the same themes, what you're starting to, I think, see is CEOs and boardroom and audit committees on boards saying, hey, we need to have a long-term plan here. And it takes time to put that in place. And so there are some companies who are being strategic and saying, we're going to stay with our manufacturing, our supply chains throughout the world, but we're going to control it more. There are other companies who are waiting to see what happens still. I think that's fewer. I think boards are driving from a fiduciary standpoint to make decisions. I think the other set is people who are saying, hey, we want to reshore, or at least reshore in quotes, to countries where the United States traditionally would see them as an ally, or at least has a relationship, so there's some more stability. And that goes to transportation, it goes to manufacturing lines, it goes to financing, and all the things that go along with it. So not everybody's made decisions, but there are a lot of people deciding that they've got to do something now, and you'll see that, I think, over the next 2 years.
It'll be very interesting to see. Michael Taylor of King and Spalding, thank you very much for enlightening us as to what are some of the issues these days with regard to reshoring, international trade decisions, manufacturing, and the like. Thank you for being with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.